Title: The Memory Jumper Chronicles. Chapter 1. The first jump. The sun was setting, casting a golden hue over the town square. Gregory and Daniel sat on the steps of the old town library, their usual hangout spot. The two had been inseparable since childhood, sharing secrets, dreams, and countless memories. But today, something was different. "Why did you even say that?" Daniel's voice was sharp, his eyes narrowed. "You know how much that means to me." Gregory sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know, Dan. I wasn't thinking." The argument had started over something trivial, a comment Gregory made about a girl Daniel liked. But it quickly spiraled, touching on deeper, more sensitive topics. Old wounds were reopened, and words were exchanged that couldn't be taken back. "I wish I could just go back and change what I said," Gregory muttered, looking down at his hands. As the words left his lips, a strange sensation washed over him. The world around him seemed to blur and warp. The sounds of the bustling square faded, replaced by an eerie silence. It felt as if he was being pulled backward, like a film reel rewinding. Suddenly, Gregory found himself back on the library steps, the sun still high in the sky. He looked around, disoriented. The argument hadn't happened yet. Daniel was laughing, talking about a movie they had watched the previous night. Confused but sensing an opportunity, Gregory chose his words carefully this time. He steered the conversation away from sensitive topics, avoiding the pitfalls that had led to their earlier argument. The afternoon passed peacefully, and the two friends parted on good terms. Walking home, Gregory tried to make sense of what had just happened. Had he imagined the whole thing? Or had he genuinely traveled back in time? The weight of the realization hit him hard. He had the power to change his past. He reached his house and hurried to his room, locking the door behind him. He sat on his bed, taking deep breaths to calm his racing heart. The possibilities were endless. He could fix mistakes, avoid regrets, and shape his life exactly how he wanted. But with great power came great responsibility. Gregory remembered the stories he had read about time travel, the unintended consequences, and the butterfly effect. Changing one small thing in the past could have a ripple effect, altering the present in unpredictable ways. He thought about telling Daniel, but then hesitated. What if Daniel didn't believe him? Or worse, what if he tried to use the power for himself? Gregory decided to keep his newfound ability a secret, at least for now. That night, as he lay in bed, Gregory's mind raced with thoughts. He was excited, scared, and overwhelmed all at once. He had been given a gift, or perhaps a curse. Only time would tell how he would use it. But one thing was clear. Gregory's life would never be the same again. Chapter 2. The gift emerges. The next morning, Gregory awoke with a sense of purpose. The events of the previous day were fresh in his mind, and he was determined to understand the extent of his newfound ability. He remembered the intense desire he had felt to change the past, and how that desire had been linked to Daniel. Could it be that the strength of their bond had triggered the jump? To test his theory, Gregory decided to start small. He called his younger sister, Lily, into his room. They had always been close, sharing a bond that only siblings could understand. He asked her to think back to a memory they both shared, a time when they had fought over the last cookie in the jar. It was a silly, inconsequential memory, but it was a start. Remember that day? Gregory asked, his voice soft. I wish I had let you have that cookie. As the words left his mouth, the familiar sensation washed over him. The world blurred, and he was back in their old kitchen, the smell of freshly baked cookies filling the air. He watched as his younger self reached for the last cookie, but this time, he hesitated and handed it to Lily with a smile. Returning to the present, Gregory looked around. The room was the same, but there were subtle differences. The old cookie jar, which had been broken years ago, was now intact on the kitchen counter. Lily looked at him, confusion evident in her eyes. What just happened? She asked. Gregory hesitated, then decided to come clean. I think I can change the past, he admitted. Lily looked skeptical. Come on, Greg. That's impossible. But as they talked, she began to notice the small changes around them. The cookie jar, the way their dog, Max, no longer limped from an old injury, the family photo on the wall where everyone was smiling. It was all too real to be a coincidence. Emboldened by his success, Gregory decided to confide in Daniel. They met at their usual spot, the steps of the old town library. Gregory recounted everything, from the argument to the jumps and the changes in the present. Daniel listened patiently, but when Gregory finished, he shook his head. It's a cool story, Greg, but time travel? Changing the past? It sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie. Gregory expected skepticism, but he was prepared. Think of a memory, any memory, something we both shared, he urged. Daniel thought for a moment, then nodded. Remember that time we skipped school to watch that movie marathon? I wish we hadn't gotten caught. The world blurred, and they were back in the dimly lit theater, the sounds of the movie surrounding them. This time, as they exited the theater, they took a different route, avoiding the school's truant officer who had caught them the first time. Back in the present, Daniel's eyes widened in shock. How? How did you do that? Gregory shrugged, a mixture of excitement and fear evident in his eyes. I don't know, but it's real, Dan. We can change the past. The two friends sat in silence, the weight of the revelation sinking in. The possibilities were endless, but so were the dangers. They had been given a gift, but with it came a responsibility that neither of them fully understood. As the sun set, casting long shadows over the town square, Gregory and Daniel made a pact. They would explore this gift together, but they would be careful, always aware of the consequences of their actions. The journey had only just begun. Chapter 3. The rules of jumping. The days that followed were a whirlwind of experimentation and discovery. Gregory and Daniel, armed with their newfound knowledge, were determined to understand the intricacies of this mysterious ability. They spent hours discussing, theorizing, and testing the limits of the jumps. One evening, as they pored over old journals and mystic texts in the town library, they stumbled upon a passage that spoke of the memory walkers. These were individuals who, throughout history, had the power to traverse and alter memories. The text suggested that this ability manifested after puberty, a time of significant emotional and physical change. That explains why it's happening now, Gregory mused, tracing the words with his finger. I just turned 16 last month. Daniel nodded, his brow furrowed in thought. But why only shared memories? Why can't you jump into any memory you want? Gregory thought back to his jumps with Lily and Daniel. I think it's the emotional connection. The bond I share with you, with Lily. It's like a bridge that allows me to access those memories. The two continued their research, uncovering more about the nature of the jumps. They learned that while minor changes in memories had little effect on the present, significant alterations could have a ripple effect, changing the course of events in unpredictable ways. One day, after a particularly daring jump where Gregory prevented a childhood accident, he returned to the present feeling drained and exhausted. His vision blurred, and he felt a weight in his chest, making it hard to breathe. Daniel, noticing his friend's distress, rushed to his side. "Greg, are you okay?" Gregory nodded weakly. I think the bigger the change, the more energy it takes out of me." The realization was sobering. This gift, as incredible as it was, came with a cost. They needed to be more cautious. As the days turned into weeks, another piece of the puzzle became clear. The jumps were powered by a mystic energy, an ancient force that flowed through the universe. This energy was both a source of power and a limitation. It was what allowed Gregory to jump, but it also bound him to the rules of shared memories and emotional connections. One evening, as they sat on the library steps, Daniel turned to Gregory, a serious look on his face. "We need to set some ground rules, Greg. This power, it's incredible, but it's also dangerous. We can't just jump whenever we feel like it." Gregory nodded in agreement. "You're right. We need to be careful, to understand the consequences of our actions." The two friends made a pact. They would continue to explore the limits of the jumps, but they would always prioritize safety and responsibility. They would respect the mystic energy that powered the jumps and never take it for granted. As the sun set, casting a warm glow over the town, Gregory felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. He had been given an incredible gift, but with it came great responsibility. With Daniel by his side, he was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Chapter 4. The first major change. The memory was clear in Gregory's mind. It was a rainy afternoon, and he had been cornered in the school's courtyard by Jake and his gang. They had taunted him, pushed him into the mud, and laughed as he struggled to get up. The humiliation of that day had haunted Gregory for years. Now, with the power to change the past, Gregory felt a burning desire to stand up to his bullies, to rewrite that painful memory. Without giving it much thought, he closed his eyes, focused on the memory, and felt the familiar pull. The rain was cold against his skin as he found himself back in the courtyard. Jake approached, a malicious grin on his face. But this time, Gregory was ready. Drawing from years of pent-up anger and frustration, he stood tall, looked Jake in the eye, and firmly said, "Not today." The surprise on Jake's face was evident. The other kids, expecting another episode of humiliation, were taken aback. Gregory's newfound confidence was infectious. Other students, who had been silent spectators in the past, now rallied behind him, forcing Jake and his gang to retreat. Returning to the present, Gregory expected to feel triumphant. Instead, he felt a wave of disorientation. His room looked different, with posters of bands he didn't recognize and trophies he didn't remember winning. Confused, he made his way to school, only to find that he was no longer the quiet, nerdy kid. He was popular, surrounded by a group of friends he didn't recognize. As the day progressed, Gregory realized the extent of the change. Standing up to Jake had altered the course of his school life. He was now a part of the in-crowd, invited to parties, and constantly surrounded by people. But amidst the noise and laughter, he felt a deep sense of loneliness. The most jarring realization came when he spotted Daniel. They were no longer close friends. In this new reality, their paths had diverged. Daniel, without Gregory by his side, had become more introverted, immersing himself in books and solitary activities. Gregory tried to approach him, to rekindle their friendship, but the bond they once shared was gone. Their conversations were awkward, filled with long silences and forced laughter. As the days turned into weeks, Gregory's regret grew. The popularity, the parties, the adulation, none of it mattered. He missed the quiet moments with Daniel, their shared dreams and secrets, the bond that had been forged over years of friendship. One evening, as he sat in his room, surrounded by unfamiliar faces and laughter, Gregory made a decision. He would jump back and undo the change. He closed his eyes, focusing on the memory of the rainy afternoon. But something was wrong. The pull he usually felt was absent. Panic set in as he realized that the mystic energy that powered his jumps was depleted. The significant change he had made had drained him, and he was now trapped in this unfamiliar reality. Desperate, Gregory sought out Clara, the paranormal investigator he had met earlier. She listened patiently as he recounted his tale and nodded in understanding. "You've learned a valuable lesson, Gregory," she said gently. "Changing the past comes with consequences. Sometimes, it's better to let things be." Gregory nodded, tears in his eyes. He had gained popularity and lost his best friend in the process. The weight of his decision weighed heavily on him. As he walked back home, the rain began to fall, mirroring his mood. He passed by the courtyard, the scene of the fateful confrontation. A sense of longing filled him as he thought of Daniel and the friendship they once shared. Determined, Gregory made a silent vow. He would find a way to restore the balance, to get back to his old life. He didn't know how, but he was willing to do whatever it took. The journey had only just begun. Chapter 5. The mystic mentor. The town library was Gregory's sanctuary, a place where he could lose himself in books and momentarily forget the chaos of his altered reality. On this particular day, as he aimlessly wandered through the aisles, a voice called out to him. "Young man, you seem troubled," said an old woman, her silver hair cascading down her back, her eyes a piercing shade of blue. Gregory looked up, startled. "I'm sorry. Do I know you?" The woman chuckled softly. "Not yet, but I believe I can help you. My name is Mrs. Alara." Curiosity piqued, Gregory took a seat opposite her. "How can you help me?" Mrs. Alara leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I know about your gift, Gregory. The ability to jump into memories and alter them." Gregory's heart raced. "How do you know about that?" She smiled enigmatically. "I've been around for a long time, and I've met others like you. Some have used their gift wisely, while others have lost themselves in the myriad of alternate realities they've created." Gregory shivered, thinking of his own recent experiences. "I wish I had never discovered this ability. I've made a mess of things." Mrs. Alara nodded sympathetically. "It's a powerful gift, but with it comes great responsibility. Every change you make has consequences, some of which you might not foresee." Gregory looked down, guilt evident in his eyes. "I changed a memory, and now my best friend and I are strangers." Mrs. Alara reached out, placing a comforting hand on his. "You're not the first to make such a mistake, and you won't be the last. But there's hope. With guidance, you can learn to harness your gift and use it for good." Gregory looked up, hope shining in his eyes. "Can you help me?" She smiled warmly. "I can guide you, but the journey will be yours to undertake. There are rules to memory jumping, and you must learn them if you wish to avoid further mistakes." Over the next few weeks, Gregory met with Mrs. Alara regularly. She taught him about the mystic energy that powered his jumps and how to replenish it. She spoke of others who had the same gift, some of whom had gone astray, lost in the realities they had created. "The key," she said, "is to always stay grounded. Remember who you are and where you come from. The allure of alternate realities can be tempting, but you must resist the urge to lose yourself." Gregory listened intently, absorbing her wisdom. He practiced under her watchful eye, learning to control his jumps and make minor changes without significant consequences. One day, as their session came to an end, Mrs. Alara handed Gregory a small pendant. "This will help protect you from the negative energies that can arise from altering memories. Wear it always." Gregory took the pendant, gratitude evident in his eyes. "Thank you, Mrs. Alara. I don't know what I would have done without you." She smiled, her eyes twinkling. "Remember, Gregory, with great power comes great responsibility. Use your gift wisely." As Gregory left the library, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. With Mrs. Alara's guidance, he was determined to set things right and restore his friendship with Daniel. The journey ahead was uncertain, but he was no longer alone. Chapter 6. The butterfly effect. The weight of the pendant around Gregory's neck was a constant reminder of the responsibility he bore. With Mrs. Alara's teachings fresh in his mind, he decided to mend his fractured relationship with Daniel. He closed his eyes, focusing on a cherished memory of the two of them, laughing and joking at their favorite hangout spot by the river. As the familiar surroundings materialized around him, Gregory felt a rush of nostalgia. He saw his past self and Daniel, engrossed in conversation. Seizing the moment, he approached his past self, whispering words of advice into his ear. The scene played out differently this time, with the two of them parting on good terms. When Gregory returned to the present, he was relieved to find that he and Daniel were friends again. However, as the days went by, he began to notice that other aspects of his life had changed, and not for the better. His once stellar grades had plummeted, leading to tense conversations with his teachers and parents. He overheard hushed discussions between his parents about mounting bills and potential foreclosure on their home. His younger sister, Emily, who had always been a beacon of joy, now seemed withdrawn and distant. Confused and distraught, Gregory sought solace in Mrs. Alara. As he recounted the changes, she listened patiently, her face a mask of concern. "You've experienced the butterfly effect," she said gravely. "Even the smallest of changes in the past can lead to unforeseen consequences in the present. It's like a butterfly flapping its wings in Brazil causing a tornado in Texas." Gregory looked down, guilt gnawing at him. "I just wanted to fix things with Daniel. I didn't think it would lead to all this." Mrs. Alara sighed. "Memory jumping is not a solution to life's problems. It's a tool, and like all tools, it must be used with caution." Gregory felt a pang of regret. "Is there any way to set things right?" Mrs. Alara hesitated. It's risky, but you could try to jump back and undo the changes. However, there's no guarantee that things will return to how they were. Determined, Gregory nodded. I have to try. I can't let my family suffer because of my mistakes. With Mrs. Alara's guidance, Gregory prepared for the jump. He focused on the memory by the river, intent on letting events play out as they originally had. The jump was successful, and as Gregory returned to the present, he was relieved to find his grades restored and his family's financial troubles averted. However, his relationship with Daniel was once again strained. As the days went by, Gregory grappled with the reality he had chosen. He realized that life was a series of choices, each with its own set of consequences. He couldn't control everything, and trying to do so only led to more chaos. One evening, as he sat by the river, lost in thought, Daniel approached him. "Hey," he said, a hint of hesitation in his voice. "I've missed this. Us hanging out." Gregory looked up, surprised. "Me too," he replied, a smile forming on his lips. The two of them sat in companionable silence, the weight of the past behind them. Gregory realized that while he couldn't change the past, he could shape the future through his actions and choices. And as the sun set, casting a golden hue over the river, Gregory felt a sense of peace. He had learned a valuable lesson about the complexities of life and the importance of accepting its imperfections. Chapter 7. The desire to perfect the newfound power that Gregory possessed was intoxicating. With every jump, he felt like a god, molding reality to his whims. The imperfections of his life became glaringly obvious to him, and he became consumed with the idea of creating a perfect world for himself. It started with small jumps. A test he hadn't studied for, a missed opportunity to ask out a girl he liked, a petty argument with his parents. Each time he returned from a memory, he felt a rush of satisfaction as he saw the immediate improvements in his life. But with every change, new challenges arose. Friends he once knew became strangers, familiar places morphed into unrecognizable landscapes, and outcomes he hadn't anticipated began to manifest. Despite the mounting complications, Gregory's obsession only grew. He began to jump daily, sometimes multiple times, tweaking and altering memories in an attempt to craft his ideal reality. He became distant, his once bright eyes now constantly glazed over, lost in a maze of memories. Daniel, who had been observing Gregory's rapid descent, grew increasingly concerned. He missed the old Gregory, the one who laughed easily and took life as it came. This new version, constantly lost in thought and always on edge, was a stranger to him. One evening, after noticing Gregory's particularly haggard appearance, Daniel decided to confront him. "Greg, what's going on with you? You're not the same person anymore." Gregory looked up, his eyes bloodshot. "I'm just trying to make things perfect, Dan. Just one more jump, and I'll get it right." Daniel shook his head, frustration evident in his voice. "You're playing with fire, Greg. This isn't a game. You can't keep trying to change the past. It's taking a toll on you." Gregory's face contorted in anger. "You don't understand, Dan. I have the power to make everything right. Why wouldn't I use it?" As the two friends argued, the strain of the countless jumps began to catch up with Gregory. His vision blurred, and his head throbbed painfully. He clutched his chest, gasping for breath. Seeing Gregory's distress, Daniel's anger turned to panic. "Greg, "Hey, stay with me." But it was too late. Gregory's knees buckled, and he collapsed to the ground, unconscious. Daniel, heart pounding, quickly dialed 911. As he waited for the ambulance, he looked down at his friend, regret and worry etched on his face. He realized that Gregory's desire for perfection had become his undoing. The weight of the countless realities he had crafted had finally caught up with him. As the ambulance sirens wailed in the distance, Daniel made a silent promise to himself. He would do whatever it took to bring his friend back from the brink and save him from the dangerous allure of the past. Chapter 8. Lost in memories, the world around Gregory was a swirling vortex of colors and sounds. He stood in the center of a vast, ever-shifting labyrinth, the walls made up of fragmented memories. Each turn he took led him to a different moment in his life, but they were all distorted, like reflections in a broken mirror. As he wandered through the maze, he came face to face with various versions of himself. There was a Gregory who had become a top athlete, muscles rippling, but with a cold, distant look in his eyes. Another was a successful businessman, dressed in a sharp suit, but with a deep sadness lurking behind his confident demeanor. Yet another was a musician, fingers dancing over the keys of a piano, but with a weariness that suggested he had paid a high price for his talent. Each version of himself confronted him, accusing and questioning. "Why did you change our path?" The athlete demanded. "We had discipline, purpose." The businessman pointed a finger at him. "You took away our success, our achievements." The musician played a haunting tune, his eyes filled with tears. "You silenced our music, our passion." Gregory tried to defend himself, to explain his actions, but the words caught in his throat. The weight of his decisions, the realization of the lives he had altered, pressed down on him. He felt lost, adrift in a sea of memories, unable to find his way back to who he truly was. As he sank to his knees, overwhelmed by despair, a familiar voice called out to him. "Gregory." He looked up to see Mrs. Alara, her form shimmering like a mirage. She reached out a hand to him, her eyes filled with compassion. "You've lost yourself in this maze of memories, dear boy. But I'm here to guide you out." With her help, Gregory began to navigate the labyrinth, retracing his steps, confronting and reconciling with each version of himself. With every encounter, he felt a piece of his true self return, the weight on his chest lightening. As they neared the exit, Mrs. Alara turned to him, her gaze piercing. "Remember, Gregory, our memories shape us, but they do not define us. It's the choices we make in the present that truly matter." With a final push, they emerged from the maze, back into the real world. Gregory took a deep breath, the air tasting sweeter than ever before. He looked at Mrs. Alara with gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered. She smiled, her form beginning to fade. "Remember what you've learned, Gregory. And be wary of the paths you choose to tread." As she disappeared, Gregory felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had been given a second chance, and he was determined not to waste it. He would embrace the present, cherish his memories, but never again let them control his destiny. Chapter 9. The warning the world had settled back into its familiar patterns, but the air between Gregory and Mrs. Alara was thick with unspoken words. They sat on an old wooden bench in a secluded part of the park, the rustling leaves and distant chirping of birds the only sounds breaking the silence. Mrs. Alara finally spoke, her voice soft and filled with a melancholy that Gregory had never heard before. "I wasn't always like this, you know. Once, I was much like you, curious and eager to explore the possibilities of our gift." She paused, taking a deep breath as if steeling herself for what was to come. "I had a family once. A loving husband and 2 beautiful children. But the allure of memory jumping, the temptation to fix every little mistake, every regret, became an obsession. I wanted to give my family the perfect life, free from pain and hardship." A tear slid down her cheek, and she quickly wiped it away. "But in my quest for perfection, I lost sight of what truly mattered. One day, I jumped into a memory, a simple one, a day at the beach with my family. I wanted to relive that moment, to feel the sun on my skin, hear my children's laughter. But when I returned, they were gone." Gregory's eyes widened in shock. "Gone? What do you mean?" Mrs. Alara shook her head, her expression pained. "I had changed something seemingly insignificant, but it had a ripple effect. My family no longer existed in the present. I had erased them." Gregory felt a chill run down his spine. The weight of the consequences of memory jumping hit him like a ton of bricks. Mrs. Alara continued, "But that's not the worst of it. There's a dark entity, a shadow that lurks in the corners of our memories. It feeds on the energy of jumpers, especially those who jump frequently, who are consumed by their desires and regrets. This entity can trap you in your memories, making you relive your worst moments over and over until you're nothing but a husk." She leaned closer to Gregory, her eyes intense. "I've felt its presence, Gregory. It's been watching you, waiting for the right moment to strike." Gregory swallowed hard, the weight of her words pressing down on him. "How do I protect myself?" Mrs. Alara took his hand, her grip firm. "You must stop jumping. The more you do, the stronger the entity becomes, and the closer it gets to claiming you." Gregory nodded, determination filling him. "I won't jump again. I promise." Mrs. Alara smiled, a sad but genuine smile. "Good. Remember, our memories are precious, but they are in the past. We must live in the present and look to the future." They sat in silence for a moment, lost in their thoughts. Finally, Gregory spoke. "Thank you, Mrs. Alara. For everything." She squeezed his hand. "Just promise me you'll be careful, Gregory. There are forces out there that we don't fully understand, and we must be wary." Gregory nodded, taking her words to heart. He had been given a second chance, and he was determined to make the most of it. He would cherish his memories but live in the present, always mindful of the dangers that lurked in the shadows. Chapter 10. The entity emerges. The days following Mrs. Alara's revelation were tense. Gregory felt like he was constantly being watched, a shadow lurking just out of sight. Every time he closed his eyes, he was bombarded with visions of alternate realities. Worlds where he was richer, more successful, where every regret and mistake was corrected. The allure was almost unbearable. One evening, as Gregory was trying to sleep, the visions became more intense. He saw a world where his parents were still together, laughing and happy. Another where he was the star athlete of his school, adored and admired by all. Yet another where he and Daniel were more than just friends. Each vision was more tempting than the last, pulling at him, urging him to jump. But amidst the beautiful fantasies, a darkness began to emerge. A void, blacker than the darkest night, that seemed to suck in all light and hope. And from that void, a voice whispered, "Join me, Gregory. Embrace the perfection. Leave this flawed reality behind." Gregory tried to resist, but the pull of the void was strong. He felt himself being drawn in, the visions becoming more and more real, the voice more and more insistent. Suddenly, a hand gripped his arm, pulling him back to reality. He opened his eyes to find Daniel and Mrs. Alara standing over him, concern etched on their faces. "You were almost lost," Mrs. Alara said, her voice filled with worry. "The void is powerful. It feeds on your desires, your regrets. It wants to trap you in a reality of its making." Daniel squeezed Gregory's hand. "We won't let that happen. We're here for you." Gregory nodded, grateful for their support. "But how do we stop it?" Mrs. Alara sighed. "The void is not of this world. It exists in the spaces between realities. To confront it, we must enter its domain." Daniel looked skeptical. "And how do we do that?" Mrs. Alara pulled out an old, worn book. This book contains rituals and spells passed down through generations. There is a ritual that will allow us to enter the void's domain and confront it. But it's dangerous. We could get lost, trapped in an alternate reality forever. Gregory took a deep breath. "We have to try. I can't live like this, constantly being tempted, feeling like I'm losing my mind." Mrs. Alara nodded. "Very well. But we must be prepared. The void will try to deceive us, to pull us into its fantasies. We must stay focused, stay together." The trio spent the next few days preparing for the ritual. They gathered the necessary ingredients, studied the incantations, and mentally prepared themselves for the battle ahead. Finally, the night of the ritual arrived. They sat in a circle, candles flickering around them, the book open in front of Mrs. Alara. She began to chant, her voice rising and falling in a hypnotic rhythm. The air grew cold, and a sense of unease settled over them. Suddenly, the world shifted. They found themselves in a vast, empty expanse, darkness stretching as far as the eye could see. In the distance, they could see a swirling vortex of blackness, the void. As they approached, the visions started again. Gregory saw his parents, young and in love. Daniel saw a world where he was a successful musician, playing to sold-out crowds. Mrs. Alara saw her family, whole and happy. But they pressed on, holding on to each other, focusing on their goal. As they neared the void, the visions became more intense, more real. But they resisted, their determination unwavering. Finally, they stood before the void, its darkness threatening to engulf them. Mrs. Alara stepped forward, her voice strong and clear. "We are here to confront you, to put an end to your manipulations." The void laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "You cannot stop me. I am eternal. I am infinite." Mrs. Alara shook her head. "You may be powerful, but you are not invincible. We will not be swayed by your illusions. We will not be trapped in your fantasies." With that, she began to chant, the words echoing in the vast emptiness. The void roared in anger, but the trio stood their ground, their voices joining Mrs. Alara's. Slowly, the void began to shrink, its power waning. With one final scream, it disappeared, leaving them standing in the empty expanse. They had done it. They had confronted the void and emerged victorious. But the battle had taken its toll. They were exhausted, drained. They returned to their world, grateful to be back but forever changed by their experience. Gregory looked at his friends, gratitude filling him. "Thank you," he whispered. "I couldn't have done it without you." Mrs. Alara smiled. "Remember, Gregory, the power of the void lies in its ability to deceive. But as long as you stay true to yourself, to your reality, it cannot harm you." And with that, they went their separate ways, their bond stronger than ever, knowing that they had faced the darkness and emerged stronger for it. Chapter 11. The battle within the world around Gregory dissolved, replaced by an endless expanse of darkness. The void's presence was palpable, a suffocating weight pressing down on him. He could feel its malevolent glee, its anticipation of the battle to come. Suddenly, Gregory was thrust into a memory from his childhood. He was back in his old school, the laughter and taunts of his classmates echoing in his ears. He watched as his younger self was tripped in the hallway, books scattering everywhere. The humiliation was overwhelming, the pain fresh and raw. But this time, Gregory wasn't just a passive observer. He felt every emotion, every sting of embarrassment as if it were happening in real time. The void's voice whispered in his ear, "Remember this, Gregory? Remember how weak and pathetic you were?" Gregory gritted his teeth, trying to push the memory away. But the void was relentless, dragging him from one painful memory to the next. He relived every mistake, every regret, every moment of self-doubt. Just when he thought he couldn't take any more, he heard a familiar voice. Mrs. Alara's calm and steady presence cut through the darkness. "Gregory, remember your training. Use the memories, don't let them use you." Taking a deep breath, Gregory focused on the pendant he had found in the abandoned house. He could feel its energy, a warm and comforting presence. With renewed determination, he dove back into the memories. Instead of shying away from the pain, he confronted it head-on. He revisited the moment he was tripped in the hallway, but this time he helped his younger self up, offering words of encouragement. He faced each regret, each mistake, and accepted them as part of his journey. With each confrontation, the void's hold on him weakened. Its voice grew more desperate, more frantic. "No. You can't escape. You're mine." But Gregory was no longer listening. With Mrs. Alara's guidance, he was rewriting his memories, not to change the past, but to change his perception of it. He was learning to accept his imperfections, to embrace his flaws. The darkness began to recede, replaced by a soft, glowing light. The weight on Gregory's chest lifted, and he could breathe freely again. He looked around, realizing he was back in the real world, with Mrs. Alara and Daniel by his side. "You did it," Mrs. Alara said, her eyes shining with pride. "You faced the void and emerged victorious." Gregory nodded, exhaustion evident in his features. "It was the hardest thing I've ever done. But I couldn't have done it without you." Mrs. Alara smiled. "Remember, Gregory, our memories, our regrets, they don't define us. It's how we choose to move forward that matters." Daniel clapped Gregory on the back. "I knew you could do it. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for." Gregory smiled, grateful for his friend's support. "Thanks, Daniel. I couldn't have done it without you either." The trio left the room, their bond stronger than ever. They had faced the void and emerged victorious. But they knew the battle was far from over. The void may have been defeated, but it was not gone. And they would be ready for whatever came next. Chapter 12. The reality restored. The first sensation Gregory felt was the softness of his bed beneath him. The familiar scent of his room filled his nostrils, and the gentle hum of the ceiling fan above provided a comforting backdrop. He blinked open his eyes, taking in the familiar surroundings of his bedroom. The morning sun streamed through the gaps in the curtains, casting a warm golden hue over everything. Sitting up, he noticed Daniel in the armchair by the window, a book in hand. He looked up as Gregory stirred, relief evident in his eyes. "You're awake. How do you feel?" Gregory took a moment to process, stretching out his limbs and taking a deep breath. "I feel normal. It's as if everything was just a bad dream." Daniel nodded, setting the book aside. "It was more than that, but I'm glad you're back. We were all worried." Gregory's gaze fell upon a folded piece of parchment on his bedside table. Picking it up, he recognized the elegant handwriting of Mrs. Alara. The note read, "Dear Gregory, by the time you read this, I will have moved on to continue my journey. I wanted to thank you for your bravery and resilience. You faced the void and emerged stronger than ever. Remember, our realities are shaped by our perceptions. Embrace yours, with all its imperfections. It's what makes you unique. Wishing you all the best, Mrs. Alara." A lump formed in Gregory's throat as he read the words. Mrs. Alara had been more than just a mentor. She had been a guiding light in his darkest moments. He felt a pang of sadness at her departure but understood her need to move on. Daniel, sensing his friend's emotions, placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "She helped us when we needed it most. But now, it's up to us to continue the journey." Gregory nodded, taking a deep breath. "You're right. I've been given a second chance, and I won't waste it. I want to embrace my reality, with all its ups and downs." With newfound determination, Gregory took the note and held it over the small trash bin by his desk. Striking a match, he set the parchment aflame, watching as the flames consumed the words. The note's ashes floated down, symbolizing his decision to let go of the past and move forward. Daniel smiled, clapping him on the back. "That's the spirit. We have our whole lives ahead of us. Let's make the most of it." Gregory grinned, feeling a weight lifted off his shoulders. "Thanks, Daniel. I couldn't have done it without you." The two friends shared a moment of understanding, their bond stronger than ever. They had faced unimaginable challenges and emerged victorious. With the lessons they had learned and the memories they had created, they were ready to face whatever the future held. As the day progressed, Gregory went about his usual routine, but with a newfound appreciation for the little things. The laughter of his family, the chirping of the birds outside, the warmth of the sun on his skin, everything felt more vibrant, more alive. That evening, as he lay in bed, Gregory reflected on his journey. He realized that while he had the power to alter memories, it was the present that truly mattered. With a contented sigh, he closed his eyes, ready to face a new day and whatever challenges it might bring. Chapter 13. The new beginning. The sun cast a warm, golden hue over the town as Gregory stepped out of his house. The air was filled with the familiar sounds of children playing, birds chirping, and the distant hum of cars. It was a scene he had witnessed countless times, but today, it felt different. Today, it felt like a new beginning. Walking down the street, Gregory took in the sights and sounds with a newfound appreciation. He had been given a second chance at life, and he was determined to make the most of it. Gone were the days of obsessing over past mistakes and what-ifs. Now, he was focused on the present and the endless possibilities it held. As he made his way to the local cafe, he was greeted with warm smiles and friendly hellos from familiar faces. The events of the past few weeks had taken a toll on his relationships, but he was determined to mend the bridges he had burned. With every conversation, every gesture of kindness, he felt the bonds of friendship and trust being rebuilt. Inside the cafe, he spotted Daniel sitting at their usual table, engrossed in a book. As Gregory approached, Daniel looked up and smiled, signaling for him to join. "Morning, Greg. How's the fresh start treating you?" Gregory chuckled, taking a seat opposite him. "It's been good, actually. I've been trying to focus on the here and now, you know? Reconnecting with people, making amends." Daniel nodded, taking a sip of his coffee. "It's a process, but I'm glad to see you're taking steps in the right direction." As they chatted, Gregory couldn't help but feel a pang of nostalgia. The cafe, with its cozy ambiance and the soft hum of conversations, had always been their sanctuary. It was where they had shared countless memories, dreams, and even the occasional heartbreak. However, as the day wore on, Gregory began to notice something odd. Every so often, he would hear faint whispers, like echoes from another reality. They spoke of events and decisions that felt eerily familiar, yet different. It was as if they were remnants of the alternate realities he had once jumped into. The temptation to jump back was strong. There were moments when he would find himself lost in thought, wondering what could have been. But every time he felt the pull, he would remind himself of the lessons he had learned and the promise he had made to himself. One evening, as he sat on his porch, watching the sunset, he felt a familiar presence beside him. Turning, he saw Mrs. Alara, her wise eyes filled with understanding. "You're doing well, Gregory," she said, her voice soft and comforting. "But remember, the journey is never truly over. There will always be challenges, temptations, and choices to make." Gregory nodded, taking a deep breath. "I know. But I also know that I have the strength to face them. Thanks to you and everything you've taught me." Mrs. Alara smiled, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Just remember, the power is within you. It's up to you how you choose to use it." As the night set in, Gregory lay in bed, reflecting on his journey. He had come a long way, but he knew there was still much to learn and discover. The whispers of alternate realities still lingered, hinting at the possibility of future adventures. But for now, he was content. He had his family, his friends, and a whole world of possibilities ahead of him. With a contented sigh, he closed his eyes, ready to face whatever the future held. And as the first rays of dawn broke through the curtains, the story of Gregory, the memory jumper, continued, hinting at new adventures, challenges, and mysteries waiting to be unraveled. Chapter 14. The echoes of choices. The town of Eldridge had always been a quiet, peaceful place. But as the days turned into weeks, Gregory began to hear whispers of others who had experienced the same reality-jumping phenomenon as he had. At first, he dismissed them as mere rumors, but as more and more people came forward with their stories, he realized that he wasn't alone in his experiences. One evening, As he sat in the cafe, a young woman named Lila approached him hesitantly. "Are you Gregory?" she asked, her voice trembling. "The one who can jump into memories?" Gregory nodded, studying her. "I am. And you are?" Lila took a deep breath. "I've jumped too. And I need your help." Over the next few hours, Lila shared her story. She had discovered her ability to jump into memories a few months ago and had been using it to relive happy moments from her past. But one day, she had jumped into a particularly traumatic memory and had been unable to return to the present. It had taken her days to find her way back, and the experience had left her traumatized. As Gregory listened, he realized that Lila's story was not unique. There were others in the town who had experienced similar challenges and consequences as a result of their jumps. Some had lost touch with reality, while others had become trapped in alternate realities, unable to find their way back. Recognizing the need for a support system, Gregory decided to start a group for jumpers. They would meet once a week to share their experiences, offer guidance, and provide support to those who needed it. The group quickly grew in size, with jumpers from all walks of life coming forward to share their stories. As the weeks went by, Gregory began to see a pattern. While each jumper's experience was unique, there were common themes that emerged. The importance of choices and their lasting impact was a recurring topic of discussion. Many jumpers spoke of the consequences they had faced as a result of their jumps, both good and bad. They spoke of the ripple effect that even the smallest choices could have on their lives and the lives of those around them. One evening, as the group sat in a circle, sharing their stories, an elderly man named Mr. Thompson spoke up. "I've been jumping for over 50 years, he began, his voice filled with emotion. "And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that our choices matter. Every decision we make, no matter how small, has consequences. And while we can't change the past, we can learn from it and make better choices in the future." The group nodded in agreement, taking his words to heart. They realized that while they had been given a unique gift, it came with great responsibility. They had the power to change their realities, but they also had to face the consequences of their actions. As the weeks turned into months, the group continued to grow and thrive. They became a close-knit community, supporting and guiding each other through the challenges and joys of jumping. Gregory took on a leadership role, using his experiences to help others navigate the complexities of their abilities. One day, as the group was wrapping up a meeting, a young man named Ethan approached Gregory. "I've heard about your group," he began, his voice filled with hope. "I've just started jumping, and I need your help." Gregory smiled, recognizing the familiar look of fear and confusion in Ethan's eyes. "You've come to the right place," he replied, placing a reassuring hand on Ethan's shoulder. "We're here to help." And as the two of them walked out of the cafe, the story of the Memory Jumper Chronicles continued, hinting at new adventures, challenges, and mysteries waiting to be unraveled. The echoes of choices, both past and present, continued to shape their realities, reminding them of the power and responsibility that came with their unique gift. If you have enjoyed our time travel, memory jumping, reality-altering style of No Sleep Tonight scary stories, please visit us at Paranormal Untold Stories. Come to listen to more of our scary stories collection. Paranormal Untold Stories encourages you to connect us if you have your own untold story that you would like our professional team to put online as a scary story. Thank you. Please follow our YouTube channel, Paranormal, Untold Stories, and encourage others to do the same. Paranormal, Untold Stories.